see the clouds, the silver linings breaking. My hope is found in you. My one defense, my confidence, the anchor to my soul. My hope is found in you. Help me to trust in the unseen. Fill every space that's in between with your promise. You are the strength that carries me. You go before me. You are surrounding me. And even now, I see the clouds. A silver line is breaking. My hope is found in you. My one defense, my confidence, the anchor to my soul. My hope is found in you. And even now, I see the clouds. A silver line is breaking. My hope is found in you. My one defense, my confidence, the anchor to my soul. My hope is found in you. I let go. You take control, and I let go. You take control, and I let go. You take control, Jesus. I let go, and you take control. And even now, I see the clouds. A silver line is breaking. My hope is found in you. My one defense, my confidence, the anchor to my soul. My hope is found in you. And even now, I see the clouds. A silver line is breaking. My hope is found in you. My one defense, my confidence.
All right, well, we are going to get started this evening. We want to thank each of you for being here, joining us for this presentation. I, of course, want to thank Dr. Wilson for leading us and preparing, and just his willingness to help each of us learn and grow And so I'm excited for that opportunity. I'm going to begin just with a word of prayer, and then we will hand things over to Dr. Wilson so that he can jump right in. I think we will have time at the end for some questions, and so if there's something that you think about or wonder about as he is sharing, just make a note of that, and we will maybe be able to have some time at the end where you can direct some questions to him. So let me pray for us, and we'll get started. God, we do just thank you for the opportunity to be together this evening. Lord, we pray that you would bless the time that we share together tonight. God, that it would be fruitful, not only informative to us, but that it would be beneficial to us spiritually. God, that we would be able to learn, grow, and even to apply some of the information that is shared with us tonight to help us develop a deeper understanding of some biblical truths and principles that we can apply to each of our own lives and also to the conversations that we have with others about your word and about your son, Jesus. Lord, ultimately, he is the reason that we're here tonight. And so we want to learn more about Jesus and about the way that he taught and the stories that he used. And so, God, we pray that you would help each of us to grow in those ways. We ask your blessings upon Dr. Wilson as he shares with us tonight. And we pray in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen.
Can everybody hear me? We're good? All right, I'm a little hard of hearing myself, so I want everybody to hear me. I'm going to start with the basic definition of economy. It comes from two Greek words, ekos, meaning household, and nomos, meaning regulation of. There's no doubt about it. The basic economic unit of that day was the household. Everybody worked from home. Your workplace was also where you lived. So therefore, people in Jesus' day, they were producers and consumers in the same place. Not like the life I had, where I went somewhere and produced, and I came home and consumed. So a very different society than what we have today. As I've said, most of the people were poor. Estimates say that about more than 90% of the people were poor. They would have been amazed at your affluence. They would have been a middle-class family. They would say, oh, you have so many wonderful things. We found remains of regular people, and their bones show evidence of food deprivation. And we know they didn't have a lot of clothes. Cloth making was a cottage industry that farmers' wives did. It took a long time to take that flax or that wool and turn it into thread and yarn to make clothes. Then you had to do that, you had to cut it, and then you might dye it. But from what I've read, most people did not have dyed clothes. There's no color. We even know this from the Bible. Remember the story of Joseph? I like that story in the old King James Version, where he had a coat of many colors, which meant his brothers did not have a coat of many colors. To give you an idea of the clothing situation, John the Baptist tells his people, he goes, if you have two outer garments, give it to somebody, give one of them to somebody that has none, which meant the giver and the person he gave it to will now have one garment. They were poor, particularly if you were a farm family, and we think about 80% of the people were farm families. That's why Jesus had all those parables using farm animals and crops. Those were the people he ministered to. Well, they worked from a very early age. These two gentlemen here, they would have already been working for a number of years. And later on, we'll talk about the role of women in the economy. But I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of the economy. And one of the first things I want to start with is how people made a living. Next slide. Farming and herding. Now, I'm treating this, the slideshow treats it as two separate occupations. But the truth of the matter is, most of these farming operations were what we call mixed farming. People had animals, and they also grew crops. Even if you had animals, you had to grow something for fodder. So about 80% of the people were involved in this. As far as animals, they would have things like sheep, goats, cattle, oxen. By the way, an oxen is not a separate species. It's simply a male cow that has been neutered. And they're very docile, and they can pull heavy loads. Mules, donkeys for beasts of burden, also chickens for eggs. Jesus in a parable mentions eggs. What is interesting, though, is these poor families could not afford to have camels or horses. Nevertheless, camels are mentioned 3 times in the Gospels. Once in that John the Baptist had a garment woven from camel hair. And the other item that people didn't have were horses. I have my cousin's wife here, who is a horsewoman. Did you know the Gospels never mention horses? Now, they're mentioned in the Bible, in other books, but in the 4 Gospels, you will search in vain to find horses. Crops, what kind of crops did they grow? The 2 most important were wheat and barley. Give us this day our daily bread. Wheat and barley. But they would also have fruit trees. You can have groves of fruit trees, groves of olives. You'd have vineyards for grapes. You get 3 products from that. Fresh grapes, like I had a couple of days ago. Fresh grapes. But then you can dry them and have raisins for the winter. You've got to do that. Winters are tough. And so you can dry those grapes and have raisins. Also, wine was a product. By the way, all these products are used locally. There's not much exports from the land that Jesus lived in. Only a few. Onions on the seacoast that Greek and Roman authors mentioned were very good. The Judean dates grown around Jericho. The balsam trees also in Jericho. And there was another product that came out of the port of Gaza that was not produced in the Holy Land, and that was the spices of the Far East. Cinnamon, nard, frankincense, myrrh, very expensive. By the way, the Romans will put an import and an export tax on those. So as you can see, that was very expensive. But these were some of the crops that they grew. It's where 80% of the people lived and worked as farmers or herders. Next slide. Fishing. At least 4 of the apostles were fishermen. And what was neat about fishing is there was only one type of seafood that Jews could eat, and that was fish that had scales, which meant if I lived back then, I couldn't have my favorite if I were a Jew, and that was catfish. As you know, catfish don't have scales. Love catfish, but Jews couldn't eat it. They couldn't eat the other seafood either. They were forbidden by the law. But what was interesting is, in the Bible, in the Gospels, Jesus and the disciples are eating fish all the time. When they fed the 5,000, fish. Fed the 4,000, fish. Jesus comes back from the dead in the upper room, and he wanted to prove that he was not a ghost. And he goes, "Do you have anything to eat?" And they said, "Yes." And they gave him a piece of fish. This was in Jerusalem, far away from the seacoast or the Sea of Galilee. Why do they have fish? You don't want fish if it's not fresh. Well, they salted it, pickled it, and that would keep for months. And so when that boy had bread and fish on those hills up in Galilee, that was probably salted fish that had been prepared and cooked. That was going to be his lunch. Instead, Jesus made it lunch for everybody. From those few loaves of bread and fish, he fed everybody. I've always accepted that. But me, I get focused on crazy stuff. As you know, when they fed the 5,000, it said they took up 12 basketfuls. And so I'm going, where do these baskets come from? If you're an apostle, do you carry around a basket? I mean, is this the miracle of the 12 baskets? Where's Brent? That's a future sermon. The miracle, where these baskets come from? I mean, I've always thought about that. So anyway, fish, salted fish. And there was another product they used that you never heard of and that I would never taste. They made garum. Now, what is garum? Well, when they prepared that salted fish, they cut off the head. They would debone it. They would take the fish guts out. And then they would take those fish guts, drain all the blood from it, put it in a vat, pour salt over it in the hot sun, and let it simmer for 2 or 3 days in those fish guts. And then that salt will draw out all the liquids out of that. And they take that and they bottle it. In the Roman world, this was their meat sauce. And it was highly prized, and the Romans would pay a lot of money for that. And we discovered a couple of places on the seacoast of the Mediterranean that made garum. What I don't know is if they produced garum up there by the Sea of Galilee. So that's interesting. Fish are very important. By the way, in my archaeological talk, I talked about the Jesus boat. From carbon dating, they dated this boat back to the time of Jesus. They call it the Jesus boat, but this boat may have had nothing to do with either Jesus or his apostles. But nevertheless, they discovered this during a drought in the late 1980s. They discovered this is recent. And my wife and I, when we went to Israel, I've been twice, we actually got to see the Jesus boats. By the way, the people that had that boat were probably poor. It has 7 different woods in it. In other words, whatever wood they could find to patch it up, that's what they used. Both hardwoods and softwoods. So fishing is a very important industry. I'm actually going to say a little bit more about that later. Next, carpentry. In Greek, Jesus is called a tekton, which just simply means a craftsman. So, what was Jesus and his father's occupation? The answer is probably woodworking. Because while the Bible doesn't address this very much, 2nd century sources do. There was a man by the name of Justin Martyr. He lived very close to where Jesus grew up. And he talked about the folk tradition that Jesus made yokes and plows, 2 things that he used in his parables. In another 2nd century source, we find out that Jesus' father made yokes, plows, and furniture. And so we see here that carpentry was something that people needed in that day, particularly the people that lived on a farm. And by the way, that workshop would be part of your home or a second building out from it. Remember what we said. In ancient times, homes were both centers of production and consumption, not like the situation that we had. Next, cloth making. This was an industry dominated by women. By the way, something interesting, it's really not part of my talk, but two of those women, and by the way, they're either Jewish women in Palestine dressed up like people in ancient times, or two modern Muslim women. Notice their wedding bands are on, there's two of them that are wearing wedding bands, and they're on their right hand. Jews in the Holy Land and also Muslims put wedding bands on their right hand. Why? Because of their prejudice against things left-handed or left-sided. In fact, in the Bible, the right hand, there's about 90 allusions to the right hand. The left side is always kind of negative, like the judgment of the sheep and the goats. Sheep are on the right. By the way, let me flip it for you. Sheep are on the right, that's your right, and the goats are on your left. So as you can see here, that's kind of interesting. But cloth making was dominated by women and would be until the Industrial Revolution, where we can manufacture cloth. The problem is, it was a problem making this. You had to grow the flax plants to make linen. You had to grow sheep to make wool. And the first thing is you had to spin those flax and wool and sheep fibers into thread and yarn. They didn't have spinning wheels. So they used a handheld device to do that. Then once you had yarn or thread, then you can make the clothes. That took a long time. Then after you made the clothes, you had to cut it. And then finally, you may or may not dye it. In the book of Acts, we meet Lydia, the seller of purple. She produced the purple cloth. It's made from mollusk in the Mediterranean Sea. And after you dyed it purple, it stunk. Because it didn't have to be in that vat for 2 or 3 days, so they had to perfume it. So that's why it was so expensive. But even in the Old Testament, women are doing this. The ideal woman, in the 31st chapter of Proverbs, we learn that she makes cloth and sell it. These women could sell it. After they made the few cloth items for their family, they could then sell it in the marketplace. And by the way, the Romans and the Herodians did not have an income tax. So the only tax that they had to collect was the sales tax. So that was pretty good. And by the way, a young woman getting ready to marry, and remember, she's marrying very young. When she did, she was very valuable. In the Jewish society, where they didn't practice abortion or female infanticide, in the Greco-Roman world, if you had a female child you didn't want, you just exposed it. Just put it on the junk heap. Jews did not do that. And as it turns out, Jews found these young women to be very, very valuable. And when she got ready to be married, her husband's family had to pay a bride price for her. So you had to buy her. And so they would come to this couple and say, my son is interested in your daughter. All right, let's talk about the bride price. And the father would go, oh, she's special. She can make clothes, and she can spin that in the thread and cloth, and she milks all the animals. By the way, before the Industrial Revolution, all the people that milked were the young women. You should already know that from the song. 8 maids a milking. It was the women that did that. And that father would say, she milks all of our goats for cheese. Goat cheese, I love it. And it was the woman doing that. And that family would have to pay a bride price for her. By the way, when she married, she got to bring a dowry into this as well. It was usually practical things that the young couple would need. And if her husband divorced her, he had to give all that stuff back to her. As far as the unmarried women, they learned these skills. They learned how to spin cloth. Now, the unmarried woman who never married, she was valuable because she had learned that. She knew how to spin that cloth. And right up to the Industrial Revolution, these unmarried women who had that skill were very valuable. And in English, we called these women spinsters. That's right. Very good. Who said that? Very good. Very good. Excellent. That's right. Spinsters. An unmarried woman, but she has skill. She can spin. And by then, they had the spinning wheel. They could turn all those fibers into threads and the cloth. So as you can see, they married early. I'd always heard that the women married early. The rabbis, in a work called the Mishnah, now I need to explain the Mishnah to you. Remember, Jesus got mad at the Pharisees because of their oral tradition? Well, eventually the Pharisees began to write this down. And by the year 200, they created a work called the Mishnah, which was that oral tradition now written down. Other rabbis commented on it, and that was the Gemara. The Mishnah and the Gemara make up the Jewish Talmud. So I went there. I wanted to find out how young are these women getting married in this society. And I found out, pretty young. But the rabbi said, if she's 12 and a day and she's gone through puberty, she can marry that early. But I never saw in all that Jewish literature somebody recommending an age for marriage. So I had to go to Greek sources. The Greek and Romans also had a society where women married early. Hesiod, a Greek of the 8th century, said 19 is a good age. He said they've now had some experience. Aristotle said 18. And Aristotle's very scientifically minded. He knew that young women who were 13 and 14, they had a lot of miscarriages, a lot of female mortality, and the babies died too because they were just too young for that activity. So he recommends a later age. A disciple of Socrates by the name of Xenophon, he recommends 14. He said they're young and they can learn. And on the wall of a village on the island of Crete, in chiseled in stone, they're recommending that the women marry at 12 so they can create new citizens for that town. So as you can see here, they married young. By the way, today there are countries that pay the bride price. And what I learned is that when those women reach 20, the bride price goes down. So that society wanted young women to marry. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how cloth making and early marriages produced something that I was shocked by. And that was, I knew that this was a patriarchal society. But what I was shocked by is that there were a lot of wealthy women. We meet married women who were wealthy, like Joanna, a follower of Jesus. Her husband is the treasurer for Herod Antipas up in Galilee. She has money. Also, we meet people like Mary and Martha. Their brother Lazarus, we know, was a wealthy man. He can put up, all the apostles and Jesus and the women followers for days at a time, feeding them. He also had a rock-cut tomb, which is also an indication of somebody of wealth. And his sister Mary, 6 days before the Passover, came to Jesus and poured perfume worth 300 days of wages. 300 days of wages. It was nard. Nard is a perfume made from a relative of honeysuckle. And she poured it on Jesus. Judas spoke up. By the way, Judas was the treasurer of the group. We could have sold that for 300 denarii. And Jesus said, leave her alone. She's pointed out a good thing. She's showing me that I'll be anointed for burial. And so he rebuked his treasurer. So, wealthy. And one I want to talk about that I'm really fascinated by, Mary Magdalene. You have heard it said she was a prostitute. That information is never revealed in the Gospels. It actually originates from Pope Gregory I, around the year 600, who spins a tale that she was a prostitute. Actually, that's never mentioned in the Bible. That's a tradition 500 years later. This is what we know about Mary. She was from the seaport town of Magdala, up on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had cast some demons out of her. She and other women, including Joanna and some of the others, sometimes would travel with Jesus. The work, The Chosen, sometimes shows this, that's for real. We sometimes forget that women traveled with the apostles. So, I'm curious. What was the source of Mary Magdalene's wealth? And you're saying, well, how do we know she was wealthy? Because on Easter morning, she heads to the tomb with burial spices. These are not things that common people can have access to. And Mary and that group of women want to add to the spices that Nicodemus had already put in Jesus' tomb. And he put in about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes. So she's wealthy. Now, I don't like speculation, except when I do it. So, what was the source of Mary's wealth? Now, I'm not a prophet. I don't know. That's the real answer. But in 2007, up in Magdala, they uncovered a huge fish processing operation where they would take those fish that they're buying from fishermen, turning it into salted fish or pickled fish, and probably make them garum that we talked about a while ago. And this was a large operation, 400 pools that they could put fish in. So I was fascinated by this, and here's what my thought is, and it's only a theory. I'm not speaking through the Holy Spirit. Remember, this is Steve, not God. But was Mary involved with that operation, either through her family and it was probably a consortium of families doing this. They may have had a vertical operation in their business plan. Your pastor has a management degree. Is it management? Do you know what a vertical operation is? That's right. In other words, they may, instead of buying fish from the fishermen, they may have even had their own fleets. And they have all the operations of that industry. Was Mary connected with that? We don't know, but we know she wasn't a prostitute. And she was wealthy. A lot of wealthy women. And I was surprised at that. And here's why it's surprising. When a man died, his property went to the nearest male relative. But what we're forgetting about is, and I've heard about this, there are husbands that love their wives. And some of these men made provisions for their wife to be taken care of. And that's why we find a lot of single and widowed women that have means. Or they may have worked out with the son. Son, I'm dying. Make sure you take care of your mother. Make sure she has money that she doesn't have to ask you for. Dad, I'll do it. So wealthy women. Cloth-making industry, entirely dominated by women. Interesting. Next. Money. I'm a big talker. Sunday morning I talked about, oh, I'm going to show you the money. I'm going to bring you in my money. That money is laying on my desk. One of you boys, point to the first coin where the headshot is in the denarius. By the way, that's a real treat. When Jesus asked, when he was asked, should we give taxes to Caesar? He, in a famous line, he goes, give to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's. That actually is the coin. In Jesus' day, Tiberius was the emperor. And that says T.I., Tiberius Caesar, Divi, or Divine Augustus. Remember, the emperor was regarded by God. Point to the other one. On the back of that coin, it says Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman religion. And there's some kind of female goddess on that side. This was the coin that they showed to Jesus. Thank you. Now I want to talk about that coin. You know what else that coin is? It's worth a day's wage. It was 80% silver, 20% copper. If you worked all day, you got that coin. By the way, it was the size of a dime. By the way, it's not true that gold and silver is inflation proof. It's not. If a family had that coin, they could buy all the food they needed for a day. A family, not an individual, a family. Now, we had silver dimes when I was a little boy. By the way, my reference for this is Mike and Jack. Remember silver dimes that were real silver? We had them until 1964. And I would mow yards in my neighborhood for a quarter. I thought that was big money. Because I could take that quarter, break it up, and for one dime, I could buy a fountain drink. I could buy 2 candy bars. They were a nickel. And I could buy a comic book for a dime. So that's how I spent my money. I was a real spendthrift at age 10. You know, but notice, I couldn't have bought a day's worth of groceries for my family with it. Couldn't do it. By the way, beginning in 1965, they started the sandwich. Today, there's no silver at all in the dime. It looks like part of it might be silver, but it's not. By the way, in the Good Samaritan, he tells the innkeeper, he goes, look, I'll be back here in a couple of days, but here's 2 denarii to take care of him. If you spend more than that, I'll reimburse you for it. There's 3 times in the Gospels that women poured perfume over Jesus. Once up in Galilee, 6 days before the Passover, Mary of Bethany, Lazarus' sister, did it. And then 2 days before the Passover, an unnamed woman did it. Perfume was expensive. In 2 of those, it's valued at 300 of those little coins. These women, and by the way, Lazarus is letting his sister spend big money. I can hear him now. What? Why didn't you tell me you were going to pour out that expensive stuff on Jesus? He goes, well, it was Jesus who, may I remind you, brother, raised you from the dead. So it was that coin. It was that coin. There's another parable where a woman has 10 silver coins. She loses one of them. It's probably the denarius. She hunts for it, but she celebrates when she finds it. Remember, they could buy food for a whole family for a day. Next, the piece of silver. I have one of these. This is what it would have looked like if I brought them. I'd be doing this. This is my coin, a piece of silver. The Tyrian tetradrachma. It was a Greek coin worth 4 days of wages. This is what the Jews wanted you to pay the temple tax with. You have heard it said, and it's wrong, that when the money changes in the temple, they exchange Roman money for Jewish money. No, they didn't. In fact, sometimes the opposite happened. because what they wanted was that coin. Why? Those coins were 94 to 97% silver, only a little bit of copper in them. Very valuable. Jesus, we think, might have paid taxes with that coin. But this coin is most noted because that was the coin that Judas had. By the way, do the math. Some of you can do math. If my little grandson was here, he's awesome. He would know how to do it. There were 30 of those coins. They're worth 4 days of wages. That's 120 days of wages, a third of a year's salary. I leave it up to you to decide whether or not that is a big amount or a small amount. And by the way, we know Jesus was a thief. It even says that in the incident when Mary of Bethany poured the perfume over Jesus. He said he was a thief. And he was. By the way, remember I'm moving pretty quick. At the end, you can ask questions. Next slide. The widow's mite. The lepton. It was a bronze coin. You would need a whole handful of these just to buy a piece of bread. And it shows up when the widow is bringing her offering to the temple. Now, you pay the temple tax with that coin I showed you. But in the court of the women in the temple, and by the way, the court of the women was not exclusively for women. Any Jew could go in it, but it was any court after that a woman could not go into. But in the court of the women, according to the Mishnah that we talked about a while ago, there were 13 boxes where you could put your offering. And Jesus commended the widow, even though all she had were 2 of those coins. Next, taxes and tax collectors. Don't read that yet. I'm not there yet. Don't you dare read it. I saw my man John. He was already peeking. Don't do that, John. I want to talk about tax collectors first. 2 of them we know by name. Zacchaeus. And he wanted to see Jesus. And he did. And he tells Jesus that, hey, any wrong I've done as tax collector, I'm going to make it better. And then Jesus tells him, oh, yeah, I'm coming to your house. Sometimes Jesus invited himself. By the way, the only time Jesus ever ate with poor people that we know of were the 5,000 and the 4,000. Why? Poor people could not have fed his entourage. Those women that traveled with him and also the apostles. So that's why we don't see Jesus inviting himself to a poor person's home. Remember, to Jesus, he wants to reach everybody, from tax collectors down to the poorest of the poor. And so that's one tax collector. The other one we meet will become an apostle, Levi or Matthew. All right, I told you there's some surprises. Here goes. Matthew did not collect taxes for the Romans. Never did it. Never, never, never. Why, you ask? Well, there are 6 regions of the Holy Land during Jesus' ministry. Samaria, Judea, and Idumea, governed by the Romans. The other 3 parts are governed by 2 of Herod's sons. Herod Antipas, who is the ruler of Galilee and Perea. Perea is that region beyond the Jordan, the East Jordan. And there was his half-brother, Herod Philip, that's in the northeast portions of the Holy Land. Matthew collected taxes for Herod Antipas. Now, he had some connection to the Romans. He had to be approved by the Romans. Augustus approved him. And they could not have a separate foreign policy. But otherwise, they were independent rulers. Here's a couple of examples. When Herod Antipas put to death John the Baptist, he did not need Rome's permission. because he was an independent ruler. Pilate, on the other hand, he works for the Romans. He finds out that Jesus is from Galilee, and he goes, oh, send him to Herod, Herod Antipas. Herod did not want any more bad publicity after he killed John the Baptist, so he sent him back. But even Pilate knew that Herod Antipas was an independent ruler. And by the way, why do we know, where is Matthew? In the 2nd chapter of Mark, might be in the 3rd. No, it's the 2nd. He's at Capernaum in Galilee. And it says he's at a toll booth. What he's doing is collecting the tariffs of people who have landed at Capernaum from across the Sea of Galilee from Roman territory or his brother Philip's territory. So Matthew never collected taxes for the Romans. He's collecting from tariff. The centurions, the tax collectors, and the officials that we meet in Galilee, they work for Herod Antipas. By the way, I was always curious. Why wasn't Matthew chosen as Jesus' treasurer? Well, this is not theological, so therefore I'm not going to tell you unless you ask me, later or something, after we're through here. He didn't choose Matthew. But Jesus had very clear reasons why he wanted Judas to be the treasurer. Some of this is theological, so I don't want to embarrass you. So I'm going to give it. But I do recall that Jesus said to the apostles, have I not chosen you? And one of you is the devil. He knows about Judas's weaknesses. Interesting. All right, but I didn't tell you that. So, now that we've talked about tax collecting, by the way, Matthew was so excited about getting saved, he invited other Herodian tax collectors to a banquet for Jesus. He's wealthy. Oh, it was a bad racket. You not only charged people for the taxes, but you did profits. And they were unscrupulous. Oh, it was awful. But Jesus wanted to reach everybody. Now I'm ready to talk about taxes, John. Did you read the first one? No income tax. No direct income tax. But we need to be honest. Any tax is going to take away from your income. But there's no direct income tax. That cloth-making Jewish woman that sold a colored, dyed cloth in the marketplace, she got to keep that money. Now, she also collected the sales tax from the person who bought it, and she will give to the ever-present tax collector who's at the marketplace. But no income tax. If you live in Tennessee or Florida, there's no income tax. If you go to a tourist site in Florida, like Dollywood or one of those places, you'll understand how Tennessee makes their money. What I call the tourist tax. All right. So what did they tax on? Land tax, the big one. More property, more taxes. If you lived in a city, you paid the house tax. Next, the sales tax. Jews, like you, paid two types of sales taxes. They paid excise taxes. Those were taxes on particular things, like salt or grain in the city. What they did, the farmers could pay part of their tax bill in grain. The Romans would take it and sell it to the city people, and they would charge an excise tax. So you had those, excise taxes. Here in the United States, well, it's not my cigarettes. The Kentucky State stamp tax. You're going, wait a minute, stamp tax. We rebelled from the British because of that. But yeah, we have them. Excise taxes are usually pretty expensive. For you, they're on gas, liquor, tobacco, even playing cards. Not that I know a lot about playing cards, liquor, and tobacco. But I do know they had taxes on it. You can see this afterwards if you want to look at it. And they had them. The other one was a percentage tax. So much a percent. And the tax collectors got more than that. The Jews hated it. When Herod died, they begged his successor Archelaus, who was before the Romans, to end the sales tax. They hated it because you could pay that every day. At least with the land tax, the guy only came around once a year. And they hated it. The Jews rebelled every time because of taxes. And they were awful. If you were a carpenter, a farmer, or a potter, or a fisherman, at the end of the year, you had paid all your money to the tax collectors, to the temple, and spending for your family, and you just broke even. You thought you were living good, because there were people that didn't. And they could lose their property, they'd become landless and homeless, or you would have to sell your children, because you didn't want to be in arrears with your taxes. Pretty bad. Various poll taxes. A couple of these. The Romans collected a tax, 1 denarius a year for a man, and any male child 14 and over. But later they changed it to 2 denarii. Oh, my denarii is not up there anymore. And they started taxing the women from 12 on up. In other words, you can make a lot of money off these young women. And so they were taxed too. They knew that these families would get those bride prices from these women. The Romans wanted a cut of that. Jesus is shown in the Gospels either paying the head tax for Herod or the head tax to the temple. We're unsure about which it is. Some of your Bibles call it the temple tax, but actually the word temple doesn't appear in the Greek text. And finally, taxes on imported and exported items. They collected both ways. Here in America, we only collect on the imports, but not the exports. But the Romans did both. So in the country, you paid, and when it left the port, you paid. So Matthew's doing both of those when he was a tax collector, same for Zacchaeus. All right, look at this. I have my cousin here, who's a lawyer, and I wanted to talk to him about eminent domain. In the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, it says that if the government takes private property to use for public use, it has to give you just compensation. Later court cases define that as market value. Now here's the big surprise. Romans didn't do that. If they wanted to put an aqueduct through your land, it was tough. If they wanted to put a road through, it was tough. They would even confiscate wealth. 2 examples. Next slide. First of these is the Jewish temple. 3 times the Romans looted the money in the temple for public works projects. The second one of these was done by Pontius Pilate himself. He wanted to bring more water into Jerusalem, and he wanted to have an aqueduct, so he just took it from the temple. There was no recourse to the temple. They had to do it. And get this. This was in my slideshow. Point to the second line. I don't know if you can read it, but you may recognize the name in Latin, Pontius Pilatus. Even the Roman governor, they were building a temple, notice, called the Tiberium, to the Roman emperor. He had to contribute to that. So this is his dedication point. The Tiberium by Pontius Pilate to the citizens of Caesarea. You can't see part of this. By the way, this was only found during my lifetime. A Palestinian woman was using it as a doorstep. And in 1961, they flipped it over and found this. Even Pilate had to contribute to the Roman state. It was a hidden tax on the wealthy. When Herod ruled, he was awful. He would take, if he wanted something, he would just take whole people's whole savings. Awful. Now, next. What kind of economy did they have? Well, I'll just read it. The economy in Jesus' day was neither a capitalist or socialist economy, as modern definitions do not work in this time period. The economy worked best for the state, rulers, not the ruled. Some important commodities like salt, grain, asphalt, and copper were even state monopolies. And so there was no protection for private property. So you cannot have, the reason why capitalism grew was because they began to recognize the right of private people to own things, and if you took it for a public use, you had to reimburse it. Now, real quick, in the next few minutes, what were some of Jesus' views about the economy? Next. Well, the obvious. Pay the state your taxes and also support the Lord's ministry with your resources. The Lord himself in Matthew 17:24-27 either is paying the temple tax or the Herodian head tax. And what he's doing it with is one of those tetradrachmas. He tells Peter, put your line in, get a fish, open the fish's mouth, and there's the coin. 2 denarii for you, 2 for me. And that would pay their temple tax obligations or the Herodian head tax. Next, we're going to move real quick, and I want to have answers. There's a time and place for commerce and banking, not the temple. Jesus drove them out. Next. However, apparently he has no problem with banking. In a couple of his parables, including this one in Matthew 25, he allows for people taking money to the banker and drawing interest. And so Jesus didn't say that was a bad thing. But you have to be a good steward of whatever wealth and possessions you have, both materially and spiritually. Next, pay your workers their agreed-on rate for what each party agreed to do. The parable of the vineyard workers. Remember, they were all paid the same. 1 denarius, that was a day's wage, even for the people that came later in the day. So you pay your workers the agreed-on rate for what each party agreed to do. It was a verbal contract. You should honor contracts. Next, motive and generosity in giving offerings to the Lord are very important to the Lord. The widow's mite. By the way, this shows children, but in the parable it doesn't say there were children. This is to appeal to your heart. Remember what I told you a while ago, I'm curious about stuff? Jesus commends the widow, but he didn't go over to her. He didn't come to her and say, hey, I saw what you did. I'm going to take care of you. There's a reason why he didn't do that. She was already being taken care of. Christian theology preaches that God is all-knowing, so he knew that. So there's not an incident where he goes over and talks to her. Next. Those who value money over their relationship with God will not enter the kingdom. There we go. A camel cannot go through a needle's eye. There was no folk tale that they had a gate in Jerusalem called the eye of the needle, and that you had the people and animals had to bow down under it. Actually, we know the gates of the city of Jerusalem from Josephus, the historian. Not true. He was talking about a needle and a camel. Camels can't go through the eye of the needle. But you're saying, well, wait a minute. Jesus did say the rich can't enter the kingdom. What he meant was Jesus spoke in a hyperbole, exaggerated speech, because he had plenty of rich friends. Jesus cried twice, once over the city of Jerusalem and once over his good friend Lazarus, a rich man. And Jesus was moved and cried about it. If you're wealthy and do the right things, and you're using your wealth wisely for good, Jesus loves you. So in my view, there were quite a few camels that went through the needle. Next, the Lord will take care of your basic needs if you seek his righteousness, perhaps so you can help others. Jesus said the lilies of the field, they were better dressed than Solomon. And the birds of the air, he makes sure they get food. But Jesus was a good economist. Did you ever take an economics class? Right in the very beginning, mankind's basic problem is scarcity. I answered for you. In other words, there is not enough resources in the world for everybody to live well. Jesus said, we'll make sure that you're clothed and you have plenty to eat. I just went to the old folks special at Cattleman's before I came here. Early bird special. I ate well before I came. And I'm dressed, and I'm not saying I'm a fashion expert. That would be a mistake. But I'm wearing clothes. When Jesus talked about abundant life, this is probably what he meant. Now, he allows some Christians to be wealthy, some to be middle class, like most of us, and some Christians to be poor. Jesus even said, the poor you will have with you always. But what is our obligation toward others? Take the mic to your Father. Next slide. The sheep and the goats. Read those verses. Matthew 25, 31 through 46.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations. He will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
These are the Bible verses that make us guilty. You know what? Besides the state that you pay taxes to, or the Lord's service, we have an obligation to help others. And you read these verses, and you can judge yourself by these. You know, have you helped somebody that needed food? Your food pantry that you work at. You're doing that. That's a good thing. You know, giving people that are sick. My wife here, she visits a woman in our neighborhood that is sick, and she goes and she has me collect her mail, and you know, my wife is far more spiritual than me, and so she makes me do the right thing. And these things, I think the toughest one of all of these is the jail and prison ministry. I did that for 4 years. And it was so discouraging. I stopped. I was a weak man. And there's a reason for it. Well, I had guys that wanted to make a profession of faith every week. They didn't know. They just didn't know. One guy came up to me one time and said, I'm going to change my life. And he went on about all the changes he was going to make. And I said, hey, that's great. So next Sunday I came to do jail ministry. This is in Lexington. And he wasn't there. So I asked, hey, where's so-and-so? And they went, oh, he's in isolation. He stabbed somebody this week. So I just couldn't do it. I got so discouraged. But there's a lady in my Sunday school class, Sue Wilson, right here. And she does jail ministry. And when she gives a report, I listen to it because I know how tough that is. And according to her, she's making a real influence in those inmates' lives, even keeping up with some of them after they get out. Lord will love you for that, Sue. You've done well. This concludes my talk. Do you have a question? Please ask questions if you want to know it. Any questions? Yes, sir. I have. Go back and give her a mic. I'm hard of hearing.
I want to know why you didn't bring that coin you have.
I know. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering what the purpose of declaring Mary Magdalene a prostitute was 500 years later. That makes no sense to me.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all that.
What was the purpose of declaring Mary Magdalene a prostitute after 500 years?
I've actually tried to run that down, but I do not know why Pope Gregory I did that. However, it has a happy ending. Remember, in the Roman Catholic system, you can change theology. In 1969, they withdrew that as a Catholic teaching. And they no longer teach after 1969 that she was a prostitute. And by the way, I should add, in all fairness, my speculation that she was involved in the fish trade, we don't actually know that. Yes, you had a question? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Tell me about these rich men that are going to be in the kingdom of heaven because they went through the eye of a needle.
People like, for instance, Nicodemus, who became a disciple. He was a rich man. Why do we know that? He brought 75 pounds of spices for Jesus' burial. Joseph of Arimathea used his tomb, gave it to Jesus. Had a friend at a college, and he goes, I'm making a lot of money just following the teachings of Christ in the New Testament. And I said, well, Christ gives a lot of advice about economy and finances, but I do need to remind you that the only property he had when he died was on his back, and he was buried in a borrowed tomb. You know, some others were Lazarus, that Jesus raised from the dead from a rock-hewn tomb. And he's apparently okay with his sister pouring out 300 denarii worth of perfume on Jesus. And there were other rich supporters. Matthew, the tax collector. And we meet people like Simon the Pharisee and Simon the leper who are entertaining Jesus. So there were rich men that went through the eye of the needle. Jesus did not always speak literally. For instance, he said, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Your hand, cut it off and all that. But Jesus never actually commanded anybody to do that personally. In fact, he repaired broken limbs, cut off ears. I mean, Jesus was awesome. So that was hyperbole, exaggerated speech. There will be wealthy people in heaven. There will also be middle-class people like Vaughn and also poor people. I mean, the Christian movement wants to offer salvation to everybody. Anything else? Well, you are dismissed. Thank you.